So today I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Rachael Turkienicz, who will present a talk on Mussar and Tikkun Olam. Is there a commandment to build bridges? And I think during this time in the world, this is a very important topic. So I'm so happy to have her here to speak to us about this. Rachael has championed pluralistic and accessible Jewish education for more than 40 years. And she's paved the way for a woman's right to fully engage with all facets of Jewish study. So we're very, very grateful for that work. She's the founder and director of Rachael's Center for Torah, Mussar, and Ethics. And she devotes herself to building pluralistic, ethically driven communities of learning in Toronto and around the world. She's one of Canada's leading Jewish voices, and she earned her PhD in Talmudic and Midrashic studies from Brandeis University. She's a former professor at York University and a frequent guest lecturer, speaker, and media resource. She's a governor of the Canadian International Peace Project and sits on the Toronto Christian Jewish Dialogue, and was the first recipient of the Canadian Friends of Hebrew University Person of Distinction Award. So I'm so pleased to welcome her today. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Rachael Turkienicz.
Thank you. Thank you. First of all, it's first of all nice to meet everyone, and also nice to see some of our Toronto people as well. I think when Torah learning brings us together this way, it's only to be celebrated. So I'm very grateful, and I want to thank you for the opportunity and the invitation for us to learn together. I'm also very honored and humbled that I understand some rabbis are joining us, and my mother, Galila, who will be joining us as well. And I do want to be respectful of our time, so I am going to jump right into our material because I hope to be able to share and cover a fair bit together. We do have a handout that is put up on the screen, and please take a moment and size it as you'd like. We also have that available if anybody would want that emailed to them or available for printing on your end. Excuse me, then do let us know. The question of Mussar and Tikkun Olam, is there a commandment to build bridges? Really, to begin to unpack that, to begin to understand what it is that we're talking about and what it is that we're asking, we really have to go right to the beginning. And we have to take a quick look at the very question that gets asked all the time, Jewishly, when we open a Torah and we start to study, we're going to ask what all the Jewish commentaries ask. And that is, why is this book starting with creation? If it's a Jewish text, if it is a Jewish Bible, start with the Jewish stuff. Start with Avram and Sarah. Let's start with the visionaries, with the first Jewish couple. Or, as Rashi, our famous commentary, says right away at the beginning of Genesis, why aren't we starting with the first commandment? If we study Torah in order to get commandments, then actually we should be starting over in the book of Exodus when it talks to us with the first commandment about Rosh Chodesh, about making Nisan the first of all the months. And then it tells us how to do that. And we understand that to be the first Jewish commandment. So it would make sense to start there. So we have two very logical starting places about where the Torah should start, but we open it and it starts with creation. And so, of course, we're going to ask that question, why? Why is the Torah telling us about creation, which is a universal? So the question, of course, being, why do we not start with the particular? Why do we start with the universal? So we right away go to Yalkut Shimoni, which is one of our ancient Midrash texts, and it says, well, we're going to look at what do we gain as messages that are important moving forward, and we'll need them Jewishly. So it's not just this is universal, but Judaism itself is going to sit quite a bit on the understanding of these messages. So the first question being Adam, the primordial being, that first being that God envisions and God creates. And the Midrash tells us God formed Adam out of dust from all over the world, yellow clay, white sand, black loam, and red soil. Therefore, no one can declare to any people that they do not belong, since this soil is not their home. So the very first statement the rabbis are making is, it says in the Torah that the first human being was made from the dust of the earth, but we should not think local dust. We should not think that God is creating the human being from the dust that just happens to be there right under that human being that God is going to be creating. That's not how this was envisioned, nor was it how it came to be. According to the Midrash, God is collecting dust from all around the world. And the dust that God is collecting is multicolored, so that every future human being will find their place, their root, and their place of belonging within that first human being. And that the entire earth then becomes a place of belonging, because humanity was created from all the soils and all the earths. So we share the dust and the earth, and it all becomes this place of belonging. When we go on, because it's going to continue to ask the question, why was all humanity created from one person? So if we understand why we're starting with Genesis, and we start with Genesis because it is the common that all human beings will have. And so Judaism will begin with, what do we all have in common? And when we look at that, the second question is going to be, okay, so we start with creation. Why not start with a group of men and a group of women and have them then form a village? And now we have the modeling we need for filling the world. Why are we doing it from one man, one woman? And according to the Midrash, we start from one human being who's actually androgynous. So equally male, equally female. And the rabbis are saying, wow, wouldn't it have been simpler? Group of men, group of women. But now their answer is, this was done due to the importance of peace among people, so that one person will not say to another, my father is greater than your father. And father in this instance could be capitalized. That what they're saying is that there never be an understanding that my understanding of God is greater than your understanding of God, so pick up a weapon. That according to the rabbis, the reason we're starting from one person is because one person creates the great equalizer. And that we should never fight with each other over this, because we will all be able to track it to that very first beginning. When we look at that, we're going to have more questions about the world. So we have this huge creation narrative with this unimaginable sequence of events that gives us the universe. And then we close in on the world we live in and humanity. And then we get this idea immediately after humanity is created, humanity partners with God. God gives humanity a task and says, you are to guard this vision. You are to enact this vision. We are partnered with God. And of course, the question then becomes, partnered for what? What are we supposed to do? And that's where we begin understanding this idea of Tikkun Olam, repairing the world. And immediately, if we start with Tikkun Olam, and it means repair the world, our first question is going to be, when did it break? So are we waiting for it to break and we're on guard to repair it? Or is it broken? If it's broken, when did it break? I want to know who broke it. I mean, it sort of just raises all these other questions about, why am I repairing this? And when we start to enter that question, we see that when Judaism tries to understand the act of creation itself damages the world. That when we talk, and it goes into the particulars that are beautifully intricate, but the idea of God being infinite and the world being finite. How can the finite contain the infinite? Because the infinite, by definition, cannot be finite. So how do we have God present in the world if God is infinite and the world is finite? That very process will crack parts of creation. It will trap parts of divine sparks. It's not because something went wrong, it's because something went right. And in order to proceed with the process of creation, we want to repair and heal that. And of course, the huge question becomes, how do we possibly do that? Aside from the intimidating moment of I'm partnered with God, I don't know how to be a partner with God. I always understand God as the master, God as the life giver, the creator, the grand infinite being. How could I partner? And yet everything in Judaism says, but we are. And so we need to learn how in order to step up, in order to do it. So when we look at Tikkun Olam and the various things we know about it, humanity is partnered with God to guard and complete the creation vision. So it is not only to guard what we have, because what we have has its cracks and its breaks, but we are partnering to move it forward. We are partnering to achieve the original vision, to complete that vision. That's the repair we're working toward. How do we do it? Well, according to Judaism, that's why we have free will. Free will is the most powerful thing next to God. That when we ask, what are the powerful things in the universe? God is, of course, the most powerful. Free will is going to be extremely powerful. And free will is given to humanity. It is so powerful that I can use my free will to deny God. I can use my free will to shut down that relationship, and God will not interfere. That is the power of my free will. I can use my free will to destroy what is around me, but the flip side of that, if I have the power to destroy it, I have the power to create it. The only problem is we're not taught how to use it. So we know we have free will, but nowhere do we have a program that teaches us this is what free will is. This is how you use it. This is how you make choices. This is how you identify the choices. This is how you broaden seeing more choices. If free will makes me as powerful as I need to be, how is it I don't know how to use it? And because we do not exercise it, because we do not have the methodology of how do I do that? How do I make choices? All of us experience automatic. We experience functioning by not making choices, by just coasting in automatic. So my free will simmers underneath my daily routines. I'm never really aware of it. I'm never exercising it. I'm not seeing the choices. I'm functioning in automatic, which is fine. It's getting me where I want to be, but nothing is repairing. The world is continuing the way the world always is because we function in automatic. Perfect example. You greet someone. Someone says to you, I haven't seen you in a while. How are you doing? And you say, yeah, okay, I'm doing okay. And we all know that an honest and true answer to how are you doing these days would definitely not be, oh, I'm doing okay. It would have layers and layers and layers. But we answer in automatic because we understand they asked it in automatic. They really don't want to hear my tsaras. They really don't want to hear how I'm doing. They asked it in automatic. I'm answering it in automatic. We're not even giving it that thought. We're all just communicating and functioning in automatic. So Mussar says, wow, first thing we need to do is recognize that's where we're living, recognize there is no Tikkun Olam. I could be a better partner. I can rise to that challenge. I just have to learn what is my free will. And it's tricky. We have a lot of studies that are coming out of universities and political science that talk about we resist choices. We get to a point where if there are too many choices, we don't want it. It's too much. There's a famous JAM study came out of Columbia University where the original thinking of the professor was more choices, more experiences. But when there were too many things to taste and too many things to choose in the supermarket, people passed by the table. Too many choices. And we know that many people who came out of the former Soviet Union and got to the West would stand in the doorway of a supermarket and freeze because they didn't have an entry point to the supermarket. They'd never seen so many choices. So to simply say, oh, we're just going to learn how to use our free will is really an understatement. That's a huge thing we have to learn of how to use our free will. And that's the very beginning, is understanding that is the tool that will make us the partner we need to be. So when we ask ourselves, okay, Mussar, what is that? Where did it come from? What is it? So first of all, the word itself. The word itself is from the Hebrew, and it is the verb limsor. Limsor means to give. I am giving with direction. I'm not just throwing something out there. The word limsor means that it has a goal of who. I'm giving it to you. I'm giving it to a focused person or goal. It's opposite from Kabbalah. We're very familiar with Kabbalah because it got very popular. And so we know the word, we know it means Jewish mysticism, but Kabbalah as a word comes from the verb lekabel. Lekabel means I'm receiving. So Mussar and Kabbalah function in opposite directions. Kabbalah is knowledge I receive. I internalize it. It's mystical. It's going to educate me about the secrets of the universe. It's very personal. I am not to share it with anybody because it's dangerous. Mussar is the opposite. Mussar moves from me into the world. They are opposite directions, and therefore they are opposite methodologies. They're opposite schools of thought. When we look at Mussar and the question of, okay, where did we get this? First of all, it's always been in Judaism. This is not anything new. Mussar became the terminology that we would use for teaching morals and ethics. Was we were going to teach someone Mussar, right? We were going to give them Mussar, which then became, I'm giving you a piece of my mind, I'm lecturing you, I'm giving you Mussar. And that has its own connotation to it. But in its actual definition of what it is, it's an all Jewish text, right from the beginning when we have text. Come the medieval period, we get Mussar texts that are being generated by some of our great thinkers in the medieval period. And then what happens is it quiets down. And by the time we get to the 1800s, some of the yeshiva, heads of yeshivas in Eastern Europe are beginning to notice something about their students. In particular, Rabbi Salanter notices, as he says, that his students can quote Torah and Talmud at the drop of a hat. It's at their fingertips. They know every little thing. They can quote it and recite it. He says, but they're not mensch. They didn't get the point. They didn't understand what was the purpose of all of those teachings and everything our text was telling us. They're not putting it together. And so he decided that there has to be a school that teaches that, a methodology that teaches that. It would be tantamount to saying, I need a methodology for being a mensch. How do I take all that Jewish learning and connect it to my character so that I know how to be a mensch? I know how to give into the world. I know that the goal of that is to repair the world and partner with God. I know that that is why the commandments are helping me. The commandments in themselves are not the goal. The commandments are the utensils. I use them. My goal is Tikkun Olam. I have to connect everything together. So everything I see in Judaism empowers my free will, helps me understand how I make choices. Then I actually make those choices to benefit the world and move things along in my partnership with God. And Rabbi Salanter said, see, that's not happening. My students are just quoting Torah and Talmud. So he came up with what we refer to as the modern school of Mussar. He began to write it down. He began to generate disciples. He began to teach this in the yeshiva, to formalize it. And then, unfortunately, with the Holocaust, that all but shut down. And now what's happening is there's a resurgence of it. So it's not something new. It's always been here. It's coming waves. So when we look and we say, we have Mussar, which is the methodology of learning to use my free will to repair the world. And we have ethics. Is Mussar the same thing as ethics? Because ethics is a measurable outcome. When I look at the ethics of a society, or I look at the ethics of a particular philosophy, I have to look at the outcome of it. And I can measure what it's doing, and I can ask myself, is that ethical? But Mussar is talking about the internal methodology. The outcome could look the same. The process is not the same. So the example I always use, because I think we can relate to it, and I think it really does help with clarifying. We are all taught at some point in our lives that if we're sitting on a bus and we have a seat and an older person gets on the bus, we are to stand up and offer them our seat. Great. What happens if they say no, thank you? Ethics would say, sit back down. You got up, you offered them the seat, they've declined, sit back down. Mussar would say, no, you don't sit back down, because it was never about them. It was about you and your free will. And inside of me, something said, it is not appropriate that I sit in the presence of an older person who is standing. So whether they take my seat or not changes nothing. And therefore, when they say, no, thank you, I'm fine, I remain standing. Ethics would say I could sit. So we see the difference, that the process is bringing us to a different understanding of choice. Which choice am I going to make in this moment? As we continue, and we're going to go through, because I'd like to get to the view through a Mussar lens. And that's on our handout. First of all, everything in creation and in Torah is based on ingredients and opportunities. We do not view Torah or Judaism as a closed narrative. We always re-enter it. We're looking for more. We're garnering more. We want the ingredients of the moment. We want the opportunities of the moment. And it is Judaism telling us to look at it that way, because when we look at the blessings that we have, not the ones we're used to saying with food and the very frequent ones, but we have blessings if you see mountains. We have a blessing when there's lightning. We have a blessing the first time you see an ocean or a river or a comet. And the blessing has to do with, we have the blessing, and then sometimes it'll say, Oseh Maaseh Bereshit, that we are blessing God for doing the deeds of creation. Not for having done the deeds of creation, because it's not finished. We're still partnering with God to move it to complete the vision. So we bless God for doing it, that this is ongoing. Mountains don't stay mountains. They change their size. This is ongoing creation. And we even have a blessing that says, Mechadesh Maaseh Bereshit, that God renews the acts of creation. This is going on all the time. So Judaism says it's actually so ongoing that we recognize it with a blessing, and we teach ourselves to view it that way. If creation is ongoing, what's my new opportunity? If this is a renewal of creation, what's my new opportunity? Because when I see opportunities, I will search for ingredients. Now I have more choices. I'm empowered more. I partner more. I improve the world more. It's all my perspective as to whether creation is finished and done or ongoing, and I'm part of it. So Mussar says, oh, it's ongoing. We are all part of it. Now we want those ingredients. And we go back to Genesis because we were told we all come from one human being in the image of God. That means we all have those ingredients, all of us. We are all in the image of God. We all have the same ingredients. The thing that makes each of us unique are not our ingredients. It's the measurements of those ingredients. All pastry is pastry, but it tastes differently because I measured the ingredients differently. And when we begin to understand it's the measurement of the thing, not the thing. What gives anything its distinctiveness is the measurements of the ingredients. The word for measurements in Hebrew is midot. I put it down, midot, measurements of my ingredients. Forgive me, I put down, often incorrectly translated as characteristics. I'm a stickler for language. I really am very careful. I think when we translate and we're using the translation, it is easy to lose the meaning of the original. That what is being said with midot is it is our measurements. But when we measure things differently, they will express as characteristics. So it gets translated as characteristics. For instance, I have had people say to me over the years, someone will say to me, you know, I'm not a very spiritual person. Well, we're all spiritual people. The question of whether someone is comfortable with a large measure of that or a small measure of that, their measurements will automatically adjust because we live in automatic. The same can be said for almost anything. People who say, I'm not a patient person. I have no patience. Everybody has patience. We all have the same ingredients. It measures differently. Mussar will say, by the way, did you know that you are in control of those measurements? So you are the one, that is your free will, is learning to adjust our midot, learning to adjust our measurements. While we know we all have the same ingredients. We learn everything about humanity by looking at God. That is what Judaism teaches us as well. God is the source, we are the image. So as much as I can understand about God, I will see myself. And we do have texts in the Midrash and the Talmud that talk about God's midot. There are 13 of them. We sing them all the high holidays long. We're singing that list of God's 13 midot. But one of the texts we don't often look at is the one I brought, and it's coming from Talmud. Rabbi Yochanan says, in the name of Rabbi Yossi, how do we know that the Holy One, blessed be he, prays? I love that question because they didn't ask, does God pray? They said, how do you prove God prays? We know God prays. What's the proof? And then they bring in proof texts, which I haven't brought, but I love that their first understanding is, of course God prays, because I pray. And the image cannot do anything the source doesn't do. So everything I know about myself, I can also understand about God. And the more I understand about God, the more I'm going to see myself. But then they go on to the next question saying, okay, so we know God prays, but of course the question could be, what would God pray? This is the omniscient being. This is the omnipotent being. What could God possibly pray for? And here, according to the Talmud, is God's prayer. Rabbi Zutra ben Tobi said in the name of Rav, may it be my will before me. And for anyone who speaks Hebrew, when we say, Yehi ratzon milfanecha, may it be your will before you, the Talmud is saying, God is saying it in a reflexive way. May it be my will before me. And again, what we get from that is that the process of prayer is to see something about myself and to empower myself, because that's what God is doing. May it be my will before me that my mercy suppress my anger, and that my mercy prevail over my midot, measures, so that I may deal with my children with a midah, measure of mercy, and that I may bring them beyond the letter of the law. It's an amazing prayer because God's praying as a parent, and God is referring to humanity as the children. This is the prayer of a parent. This is when you're walking up the stairs because the kids are upstairs going absolutely wild, chaos prevailing everywhere. And as you walk up the stairs, you're saying, don't let me get mad, don't let me get mad, don't let me get... It's that sense of understanding my measures are full. And if I get up there in this state, that's it. I'm done. Knowing that's not where I want to lead the moment. I want to increase my measures. So when I get upstairs, I'm in a different frame of mind. That's what God is saying. God is saying, wow, they push me. Boy, oh boy, oh boy. My children push me. I want to increase my measures. I want mercy to be the measure. Why? Because then I can bring them to understand nuance. I don't want my children as a parent living in a world they think is black and white. I do them no service that way. I want to teach them nuance. And the only way for me to do that is through my compassion. And my compassion will have limits, as do all my measures. So I need to learn to increase those measures. It's tricky. The whole methodology of how do I do that is tricky. It involves a change of language. If I am saying that the world does not exist in black and white, then I have to stop using the language of black and white. If I turn to someone with language of correct, incorrect, right, wrong, I am reinforcing an image of black and white. My measures are always listening. They'll always adjust within me. When I begin to use my free will to choose my language, things already start to change. When I start to use the language of appropriate and inappropriate, it means I am including context. Context of a moment is what brings nuance. It's what takes me out of an understanding of black and white, because black and white is an absolute. It will always be right and wrong. It will always be correct and incorrect. There is no nuance. But appropriate and inappropriate will lead me to ask, appropriate for what? And now I have context. And now I have more choices. So the very first step is, of course, look at my perspective, which, by the way, I choose, and the language, which I choose. And now I'm beginning to impact my measures. Does repairing the world include building bridges with other people? And there's our question. So, to get right back to the beginning of Genesis again, Genesis has everything in it, including the one asked question that God never answers. Cain turns to God after he's killed his brother, and God says to Cain, what did you do? Where is your brother? Why is his blood screaming out to me? And Cain says, oh, am I my brother's guardian? Hashomer achi anochi? With the question to God saying, oh, that was my job? I thought that was your job. You're the parent. You're the creator. You trying to lay that one on me? You didn't tell me I have to be his guardian. And it becomes the statement of the human condition. Will I be accountable for the things I do? Or will I try to parse it out wherever I can, including God? When I look at history Jewishly and I say, how could God allow that historic moment? Judaism would answer back and say, did you first ask how human beings allowed it? Where were the human voices that should have stopped it? Or are we still back with Cain saying, oh, is that my job? So Cain poses the question and God doesn't answer it. It gets left unanswered. So the Torah can show us, if I answer that no, if the question is, am I my brother's guardian? And the answer is no, you're not. You're right. It should be God's job. Now let's watch what happens through Genesis. We get to the end of the book of Genesis, and now we have brothers again. We have Joseph and all his brothers. And what do his brothers try to do? Kill him. So how far exactly did we get from Cain and Abel? From the very first siblings in Genesis to the very last siblings in Genesis? And they're doing the same thing. If we answer the question and say, I am not responsible for my fellow human being, we get nowhere. We go in circles and we just repeat the pain and the suffering over and over and over again. God doesn't have to answer that question. We answer that question. And the Torah shows us the answer. But when we look at Joseph and his experience, his brothers try to kill him. They're open about it. He doesn't die. He ends up in Egypt and he becomes his brother's guardian. And he does it hugely. He is the guardian of Egypt. He makes sure that all of Egypt will not starve in the famine. He is the guardian of Pharaoh's peace of mind because Pharaoh's being tormented by nightmares that he can't make stop. And Joseph makes them stop. And when his brothers and ultimately his father show up, he is their guardian. He takes them in. He makes sure they are fed and sheltered. He makes sure they are safe. Where did he get that from? These are the same people who tried to kill him. But now the Torah is showing us, watch what happens when the answer to the original question is yes. If God were to say to Cain, yes, you are your brother's guardian, we have Joseph. Joseph, the very last sibling that we see in the book of Genesis, is the tikkun. He is the repair. Cain is the one who introduces the human condition of that into the world with the unanswered question because he can't fathom the answer. Joseph lives the answer. And we see, oh, that's what happens when we are each other's guardians. We protect each other. We take down the barriers. We make sure people are fed. We make sure people are sheltered. We make sure people are safe. Look at the power of Joseph because he answered the question differently. But we want to be careful because if we are each other's guardian, remember, it's not the thing, it's the measure of the thing. If I am your guardian, how much am I in your business? Because I'm your guardian, I want to make sure you have food. I want to make sure you have shelter. Great. What if I don't like who you've chosen as a life partner? Am I your guardian? Can I get right in there and say, no, I forbid it. I am not coming to that wedding. In fact, I will make sure to put every barrier in front of you because I am your guardian. What if you get a job I don't think is the job you should have? Am I your guardian? Should I be right in there? And in fact, if we're shopping in a supermarket and you pick up cheese to put in your shopping cart and I'm your guardian and I look at that cheese and I'm going, oh, you trust that, Hector? No, I'm your guardian. Put that cheese back. It's the measure of the thing. So we always want to understand that we must be invited into someone else's free will. Free will is mine alone. I respect yours is your free will. Otherwise, I'm causing damage. The measure is too great. So I always have to be aware the thing, the measure of the thing. In fact, we see it. Every event has all the ingredients of blessings and curses. We decide it by its measure. Perfect example is Egypt. We know that Egypt for us represents slavery, oppression, othering, horror stories of what one nation can do to another. And yet we have this little voice in our commentary saying, how did we get to Egypt? Because they took us in when there was a famine, because they sheltered us, because they did keep us safe. It started as a blessing. It ended as a curse. Both those realities are true about Egypt. So which one am I going to take as a perspective? And Mussar says, the measure of the thing. It ended up horribly in a way that far surpassed the blessing. I'm aware of the blessing and I learn to be grateful that someone has sheltered us. But my focus, because of the measure, will be Pesach. It will be that I was redeemed from this nightmare. But the Seder itself is full of symbols of nuance, that I'm not comfortable with how much Egypt suffered. I'm not comfortable with all the destruction that was done in order to save me, because it started as a blessing. I'm always aware. Everything has all those ingredients in it. My free will chooses what is my perspective and where will I focus. So are we commanded to build bridges? I go back to the ancient text again. Numbers Rabbah says, the only reason that the Holy One, blessed be he, created the world was so that there would be peace among humankind. There's the goal. The world isn't created so God has a playground. And the world isn't created for one nation to get their concept of God correct, and everybody else should actually comply. And now we know why the world was created. On the contrary, and this is just one of many statements we have through Judaism, peace is tantamount. And the world, we're told now, was created for one reason, and that was to figure out peace. In the Tosefta, it says, one sustains poor non-Jews with poor Jews, and one visits sick non-Jews along with sick Jews, and one buries dead non-Jews along with dead Jews. All this is done on account of the ways of peace. Our ancient text is telling us we live in a world with people. We cannot just sit there and take care of ourselves, because now we're back in automatic and the world will not repair, and peace is absolutely not being pursued. It's being ignored. And I've also brought from the Mechilta, the Rabbi Ishmael, which is a text that's a little bit older than Numbers Rabbah. So now we're back into about the 3rd century. So we're really quite ancient, where the Mechilta says, a city that has both non-Jews and Jews. You appoint a community manager for non-Jews and a community manager for the Jews. You collect charity from the non-Jews and from the Jews, and you support the poor of the non-Jews and the poor of the Jews. You visit the sick of the non-Jews and the sick of the Jews. You bury the dead of the non-Jews and the dead of the Jews. You console the non-Jewish mourners and the Jewish mourners, and you launder the utensils of the non-Jews and the utensils of the Jews because of the ways of peace. If you look at that, there is a progression to that list. And the progression begins with someone's in trouble. And then it goes through that list of a little bit of trouble to major trouble. And when someone loses someone, God forbid, and ends up mourning, washing the utensils, laundering the utensils in the ancient world is how they are able to leave their mourning. It's how they can then re-enter the world. So this entire list starts with build an infrastructure, because people are going to get in trouble. That's just the nature of living. Things happen. Make sure there's an infrastructure. Put the supports in every step of the way. Put the supports in, put the supports in, put the supports in. And if the worst should happen, make sure you can bring them out of it. But this text is saying equally, Jews and non-Jews. And when we hold these two texts together, the Tosefta and the Mechilta, then we look at it and we say, They're kind of not agreeing on something because God bless us, that's who we are. We won't agree. We're Jewish. We are taught to debate and discourse. So we're looking at two texts who are telling us we have to have these things in place. But notice where they disagree. One text is saying it's our responsibility to do it in the non-Jewish community. The second text is saying, no, it's our responsibility to make sure it is being done. Allow that community to learn to do it for themselves. We just are the guardians, make sure it's being done. But we are not the ones who have to step in there and do it the way we do it, because we have a flavor to the way we do it that speaks to a Jewish community. We want to respect that different communities have their flavor and it will speak to them. There have been times over the years, because of the work I do with building bridges between faiths, between communities, etc., that there are things that are noticed from community to community. And when there's open dialogue, a person will turn to the other community and will say, wow, how did you guys organize that when someone is mourning, all the food arrives at their house? And that's a way of sharing what goes on to make sure it can then gain the flavor of its own community. Learning to build the bridge. I've just brought some quotes from the modern Mussar masters because I think they say it way better than I ever could. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, founder of the modern Mussar movement, said, "A good Jew is not one who looks out for another person's soul and his own stomach, but rather the other person's stomach and his own soul." Your spirituality is entirely private. Nobody should be commenting on it unless you've invited them to. It's your free will. It is your relationship with God. It is your soul. I am not welcome there unless you have asked me there. However, I will keep an eye on, do you need food and are you hungry? I won't wait for an invitation. That's my guardianship. I will watch. Rabbi Yosef Hurwitz said, the problem with people is that they want to change overnight and have a good night's sleep that night too. I think he says it brilliantly. Mussar is hard. It's hard. We're going to angst. We're going to agonize. We're going to think, oh my goodness, what, did I overstep? Is that okay? Was that appropriate? Did I hurt anybody? Did I do more damage even though I intended good? Every time. It's not easy and it's not peaceful. When we learn of our free will, we learn of our power, and we want to be very careful. And then we have from Rabbi Simcha Ziv, it is the work of a lifetime. That's why you were given a lifetime in which to do it. It really is ongoing. The methodology opens all kinds of options and views that you didn't see before. And now tomorrow is different than today. And we know the day after we'll do the same thing. We're not going to finish this. We don't anticipate that we are partnered with God and therefore, in the year 3025, we're done. We don't begin to think that way. It is something that will take our lifetime to be that partner and to celebrate that partnership and to rejoice that I have that opportunity, even when I get it wrong. And if Genesis taught us anything, it taught us that the journey of a life takes longer than a lifetime. And we're comfortable with that. The measure of the bridge from grand to the mundane. This is the last thought I want to share. We talked about building bridges with communities. We talked about the flavor of the community. We talked about everything. The Torah doesn't have to command us to be a guardian. It showed us what happens when we're not, and it showed us what happens when we choose to be, and then respects our free will. But there's also the mundane. Every time we greet each other, we build a bridge. In the Talmud it says, Masachet Brachot, it is said of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai that no man ever greeted him first, not even a heathen in the marketplace. Think for a moment how many games we play in our head When we enter a room and we know someone there, we don't know someone there, and we think, should I say hello first? I mean, they saw me, so shouldn't they say hello first? I said hello last time. So they're not saying hello. Actually, are they even avoid, like, did they look away? All the calculations about whether we should greet someone. And the Talmud is saying, but greeting is building a bridge. Why would you ask that question? Greet them first. Exactly what are we calculating in our measurements by waiting for them to greet us? Is maybe our ego measurement too large? Our kavod, our respect measure too large that we feel they should be greeting us? At which point Mussar would say, and the world returns to automatic. But the ability of saying, I will always greet. I will make that choice. When appropriate for the moment, I will greet because it builds a bridge. And in fact, every time in Hebrew we greet each other with the word shalom, the word doesn't mean hello and goodbye. The word means peace. So we're not greeting each other, we're blessing each other. I offer you the blessing of peace, which all these texts said is where we want to be. It's where we want to get. So I offer you the blessing of peace. And when I ask in Hebrew, ma shlomcha or ma shlomech, which always gets translated as, how are you? That is not what I just said. When I ask ma shlomcha, I am literally asking, and how is your state of peace? That is what I just inquired. I didn't ask how you're doing. I actually don't want your entire medical history. There are only very few people in the world I would actually want their entire but I didn't ask for it. I asked if you're calm. I asked if you're at peace. It's a very different question, and it builds a bridge. So are we commanded to build bridges? No, we do not have a thou shalt that tells us to build a bridge, but we have everything else that shows us that we should do that, because if we choose not to, we've lived where that leads us. We don't want to go there again. Okay, thank you very much. Yes.
Okay, thank you so much, Rachel. That was very deep and very profound. I'm actually feeling a little bit teary.
Oh.
So thank you for that. Very, very meaningful. I think, building bridges, particularly in this time of pandemic and separation between us, is so very, very important. So these are very, very precious teachings. So I'm so grateful.
Thank you.